Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's see. Sorry, first and foremost, I'm checking all my volumes and stuff, so don't mind me. Sorry, first and foremost, about not making it to do a stream last night. I got super wrapped up in things, and John's not been feeling well, and oh, I think I'm iffy. I'm iffy. What's up, Joseph? And what else? Oh, and all the holiday prepping and shopping and everything else has just been crazy. So yeah, I was like, wait a minute, and I seen the time. I'm like, let me go sit down and do this. I want to share a couple of stories, share a couple of new things. IHD just did his video on the past year's dog attacks. I highly suggest you guys watch it. Let me go shut my door a little bit because of the light. Like I said, I'm kind of ill prepared today. I'm not completely prepared. Okay. So yeah, I will get into this. I will do some reading, some everything else. I will give everyone a chance to pop up on the stream. Like I said, I had to make a sorry thing. I totally fucking forgot. So, that was me. It was a busy night, and then I also ended up I'm pulling up letters and sites and links and all kinds of shit. So yeah, I totally got distracted. So, Okay. Huh. That's unusual. My computer's done all kinds of updates, so it's doing all this fancy shit. So it's got my stream up in the corner, which I'm totally not used to. I want to start out by covering something we already did, and but I feel like it's important. So what I want to do, okay, so Joseph says it's okay, good. What I wanted to do is just check and make sure with all the updates and everything, the computer keeps updating. I'm like so sketchy about it all. I'm already shitty with technology anyways. So please, for those of you, Joseph right now, or anyone else that views the video in the future, please go watch that new IHD video. It is a very good one. Okay, so yeah, this one was from a couple years, just 2 years ago now, since we're, well, technically one, since we're about in December. But about people that regret getting dogs. 54% of dog owners have regrets about getting a dog. We've noticed this behavior with people already when you talk to them and they have dogs and they're just like, oh, but all the hair, but this, but that, all these things. And you're just like, fuck, man, you're not picking up on any of this. It seems like way too much to deal with. So just recently donated to dogsbite.org again. I try to do it at least once a year. I would highly suggest you guys doing that if you can. I do it around the holidays to let them know that we appreciate all the work they do. Here is the story from Forbes on 54% of people regretting owning a dog. I'm the one who has to completely take care of everything, even though everyone else promised they would, says one dog owner when asked if they had regrets about getting a dog. Other dog owners expressed similar frustrations. A new Forbes advisory survey of 2,000 dog owners found that 54% have regrets about getting a dog, and of those, 27% have strong misgivings about dog ownership. And what this is, your instincts are trying to tell you something and you're ignoring it. There's all that pressure that comes too with the dog. We were talking about it the other day. We were watching a bunch of videos and I said, it's true. It's like a weapon, that you can own. If your dog runs down the street and attacks someone, and as I was just reading that story about the dog that attacked all 3 kids on the school bus, the driver and 2 children, and they caught the dog, and then they took it home and returned it to the owner. And now they're waiting to see if they're going to comply with the 10-day quarantine they're asking them to do with this dog. I said, imagine, because we don't do that shit for humans. If one of us ran down the street and jumped on a school bus and attacked a few people, we're not getting returned home, And it's so bizarre. But I digress. The unconditional love of a dog was a big motivating factor for many to get their canines. 56% of dog owners got their furry friends for companionship, but the responsibilities that come with caring for a dog can be challenging. One dog owner with regret says, "It's like a baby. I can't just take off. I have to make arrangements." Okay. The Northeast has the highest percentage of dog owners with regrets, and the Southwest has the least. Okay. The Northeast ranking at 68%, and Southeast at 56%. The Midwest, 48% of dog owners with regrets, West being 42%, and the Southwest falling at 39%. While no one disputes dog owners' love for their pups or the benefits of dog ownerships, the challenges can be many. Remorseful dog owners cited many issues that trigger regret about dog ownership. Among the top reasons they regret getting a dog were the messes, challenges in finding care for the dog, and dog training. I will say in my area, it's easier to find someone to watch your dog than it is your child. 27% of dog owners say that cleaning up after the dog and the dog hair is a huge problem. Finding care for the dog when they're traveling or away at work. Training the dog, and I'm listing these in order of what they said, the percentage wise. Barking, whining, and other dogs' noises. Dogs' health issues. Urination and defecation indoors, falling at 22%. Walking the dog, letting the dog out regularly. The dog escaping or finding the lost dog, 22%. Disruption of my sleep, socialization of the dog, destruction by the dog, biting at 18%. Okay. What about the rest of us that don't have them? Okay. Because I don't own a dog and I still end up having to clean up after them, right? I don't have to find care for them. I don't have to train them, but I have to deal with the fact that my neighbors don't train their dogs. Okay. I suffer the costs of having the dog. I have to listen to the barking, whining, and other noises. I have to deal with urination and defecation. Maybe not indoors, but everywhere else. I have to deal with people that walk their dogs and let them piss in the front of my yard. I have to deal with my neighbors' dogs getting out, escaping, and trying to find them. They disrupt my sleep and they cause destruction and the biting. So this is everybody's problem. It's like I said, and I've said this so many times. This isn't just a one-person problem. What's up, word of the day? It's an everybody problem. All right. So they don't give a fuck. So, and yeah, it's Saturday in the middle of the day. I highly doubt many people are going to make it today, especially since I didn't make it last night. And it's just happened. So, word of the day, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. The cost of dog ownership has forced some dog owners to skip routine veterinarian visits, take a pass on emergency surgeries, and or not buy medicines for their dogs in the past year because they couldn't afford it. 31% of dog owners say they can't afford up to $2,000 in vet bills, even if the treatment could extend or potentially save the dog's life. 65% can't afford vet bills under $5,000. Okay? Well, no shit. Nobody can afford that kind of crap. It's fucking crazy. I'm glad you're here now, Joseph. I'm always glad to see you. And I want to go into this. Okay? Not this one. Okay, so I got a letter. And I'm going to go ahead and read this, okay? Hello, Ashley. My name is Satyam, years old, and I live in New Delhi, India, which, as we all know, is a huge problem out there. English is not my mother tongue. That's why I'm sorry for any grammatical mistake I make, if any. I love how they're always, when people write me from other countries, they're always apologizing for grammar errors and shit, and they actually usually have better grammar than most people in the States, but I also had 2 incidents with dogs. One when I was 8 years old. I went to meet a friend at his home and their landlord had a big-sized German Shepherd. I had no idea about it as I entered their house. He, the dog, charged at me, barking at the same time. He was barking so loud, just like a lion or a tiger. For an instant, I thought I was going to die. This was my last day. But for God's sakes, the dog was on a leash. He was trying to break that leash so hard. I screamed. The dog owners came and were saying that the dog was harmless and he will do nothing. I don't know if that was luck or anything. If on that day the dog had no leash, I was going to die for sure. Second one was a long story, but if I tell you short, at the time I was in my 10th standard in school, and in that incident I was also scared out of my wits, ma'am. The dog was a Labrador. I got your channel from I Hate Dogs, and your videos are nice and informative. I love how you saved your son from the dog. Bye, and I'll delete some of that. And how you also had protected your son from the dog and broke his jaw. That satisfied me because you're a strong lady. I'm now a true hater of dogs. In my country, India, also this crazy dog worshipping culture is growing very rapidly. People prioritizing dogs over humans and saying that dogs are better than humans, and it really pisses me off a lot. I mean, we humans are most intelligent species on the planet. Why the hell are we worshiping these crazy mutants? Indeed, every animal has a right to live on the planet, just like us, but in their own habitat. But these crazy dog owners don't realize it. I can talk a lot about this topic, but I'm concluding my points till here. Always loving your content, ma'am. Keep growing. Will always wish good for you. A lot of love to you and your son as well. I hope you will do great things in the future, and he will as well. Yours truly, Satyam. And he attached a couple stories, okay? And I went through a couple of them. I can't show them. As we all know, that's become a whole thing. You have to be really careful about what you say, any pictures you show, anything you do, because they will come down on you about it. And so that almost makes me happy that I can't, that I'm not knowledgeable enough to put the images up on screen. A lot of times I do it with the cell phone. I don't even think that's probably the best idea at this point. I want to be very careful legally, and everything else, because I don't want my life all fucked up over some stupid shit, right? So, here is, and this won't be a super long stream today. I just want to make sure I do it because I told everybody I was going to, and I totally fucking didn't, and I'm so sorry. And I got to get back to my son, but this story, and I have another story from a beloved member of our group, and I'm going to keep him anonymous until I see his edited email and see what names he left in and what names he did not. This story cracked me up. It was rather old, but we seen it. We were watching YouTube the other day, and we seen it pop up in a random video, and we were like, "Oh, this is hilarious." Some of you may have heard it. In December of 2005, Russian squirrel pack kills dog. And we were cracking up, and we were like, "Oh, it's a Russian squirrel, But either way, I mean, it's so funny. See, I Hate Dogs just did a video right now, actually. So squirrels have bitten to death a stray dog which was barking at them in a Russian park, local media reports. Passersby were too late to stop the attack by the black squirrels in a village in the Far East, which reportedly lasted about a minute. That's how fast they did it. They are said to have scampered off at the sight of the humans, some carrying away pieces of the dog's flesh. A pine cone shortage may have led the squirrels to seek other food sources, although scientists are skeptical. The video that I watched, side note here, was about critters that eat things that don't seem to be, what we would generally know them to eat. So, you have omnivores, and they were talking about carnivores that would eat, herbivore diets and vice versa, if they needed to. I don't think that's what this had to do with at all, in my personal opinion, from reading the story at a few different feeds, is that they wanted to kill the dog. The attack was reported in Parkland in the center of Lazao, a village in the Maritime Territory, and was witnessed by 3 local people. A big stray dog was nosing about the trees and barking at the squirrels hidden in the branches overhead when a number of them suddenly descended and attacked. They literally gutted the dog, local journalist Anastasia Trubanista had told the newspaper. When they saw the men, they scattered in different directions, taking pieces of their kill away with them. Mikhail Tuyunov, a scientist in the region, said it was the first he had ever heard of such an attack. While squirrels without sources of protein might attack birds' nests, he said the idea of them chewing a dog to death was absurd. If it really happened, things must be pretty bad in our forests, he added. They note that in a previous incident with autumn chipmunks had terrorized cats in a part of the territory. A Lezo man who called himself only Mikhailik said that there had been no pine cones at all in the local forests, and the little beasts are agitated because they have nothing to eat. I'm sorry. Yes, that Bob V, that story is on my channel. Um, I'm not ashamed to talk about that kind of stuff, as I also try to be careful. I've being on ranches and things like that. I've done a lot of stuff to dogs. As we all know, they're a menace, and not many other places that a dog is as big a menace as it is on a ranch or a farm. And in the states that I've lived in and done ranching, it is legal to kill a dog that attacks livestock. So I've done that a few times. Livestock can be anything from chickens to cows to sheep to whatever. So, you are allowed to defend yourself. I was just talking about this the other day. For example, one of these states was Texas. Okay. And in Texas, you can it's so bizarre, the laws there. And this is really what it is. You can look it all up. You can shoot someone for breaking into your car for an attempted carjacking, right? So you can kill someone for breaking into your car. Okay? First time you see them doing it. You can kill a dog for attacking a cow, okay, or a chicken or what have you. But if a dog bites a person, it's a one bite law state. I have the video about that. That means the dog is allowed one bite before it ever faces any type of scrutiny or being labeled as a vicious dog or anything. So they get one bite. But a human doesn't get one chance to make a mistake and break in your car, and the dog doesn't get one chance to attack a cow without being killed, right? But it can bite a person, and that's okay. It's so fucking strange, okay? There's other states like California where it's legal to put out poison for dogs on your property. The other states, not so much. You have to, what's up, Cosmos? Cosmos reminded me that I forgot the stream last night. So you've got to really, 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 and I've always encouraged people to do this, and I will continue to encourage people. Read about the laws in your state and your specific county. Dog bite law has a lot of good stuff in there. Okay, so check them out. I highly suggest that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have extra money or time or whatever, don't forget to donate to dogsbite.org. I make it a holiday thing every year and donate to them to make sure that they know that we appreciate them. So I sent an email to myself, and I've been constantly running into issues with these emails. Okay, and I have like some of them are coming through and some aren't, and it's just so frustrating to me because I really put a lot of fucking effort into this email I put together, and it just never went through. Okay? Oh, it's okay, Joseph. And yeah, California is expensive. It's just really frustrating. I don't fucking know. It's just really, really been bothering me. And I put together this whole fucking email um about the best like points and shit and all this stuff, and I was so excited about it, and then it never fucking went through. And so I was looking to see if it was in my drafts or anything else that it's not. So I'm like pretty pissed off about that, I have to be honest. The fucking technology pisses me off sometimes. But I fucking I it was like, oh, I'll tell you, and then I'll get it all back together and we'll do it. But I was like, how we treat veterans over how we treat dogs, how much money goes into sheltering humans or sheltering dogs, and how many facilities there are in comparison. And it was so infuriating. And I did another video about this that wasn't nearly as detailed as all the research I did that didn't fucking come through, which just really fucking bothers me. I cannot reiterate enough how much it bothers me. And I keep looking back too and going like, it's got to be in here, right? Like, yeah, it's fucking not, and it's just, oh God, it's so frustrating to me. But yeah, I will get into this next story and we'll cover that. Yeah, IHD did. He posted a great new video. I'll probably share it to the channel so everybody can see it. Because like I said, I don't expect a bunch of people to show up to this stream. I will not be able to do shit on Friday because it's Thanksgiving. So I'm going to shoot for sometime maybe that weekend or the following weekend. I don't know. I've been so fucking busy. And with my business, when Thanksgiving's coming around and shit. I mean, it's like crazy all the shit that people are asking me to do. So I'm going to take a glance at this email. I do appreciate everybody that was able to show up today. This email says, thanks again for hosting all the live streams. You really know how to bring a community together. I hope you don't beat yourself up over how few of them are. The quality of the events more than make up for it, and I'm not sure I'd be able to keep up if there were more of them. So here's the edited document that I've been sent. And like I said, I'm not gonna, PDF is not coming up. There we go. Open. Okay. There it goes. So yeah, I really, really am excited to read this. And I'm going to encourage you guys again to please email me your stories or anything you want me to share at dogskillchildren@gmail.com. I will put the email in the link. Okay. And here's the story. Okay. And it's edited, so he's allowed me to share this. And what I will do is leave it up to him if he wants to claim his story or if he just wants to stay anonymous. But this is someone we all know from the channel that's here quite often, and I'm very appreciative of. The story is broke down into 3 parts: the beginning, pre-dog hater, and then dog hater. Okay, and this is the beginning. And he put a lot of effort into this. It's a long story, and I really appreciate that. It's these firsthand accounts that mean so much when it comes to, was it the group Pitbull Awareness? God, I love that channel. That's those firsthand accounts and the way they're all laid out and put together that makes all of this so real, so pertinent. So, the beginning. My name is Michael. I grew up in East Texas in a somewhat strict Mormon family. I had a total of 8 sisters and 1 brother. We all had the same parents. As far as pets went, we mostly had cats and they stayed outdoors. At one point, we had a dog. My dad got it because he had one as a kid and thought the family would like it. I remember petting it a few times. It seemed pointless because the dog had the same blank expression no matter what you did. Cats at least seemed to enjoy the petting. We only had her for a couple months. During that time, she killed a brand new litter of kittens. By the time I found her, she was shaking the corpse of the last one. She must have eaten the others. I don't know how many times I hit her while crying, but she had that same mindless expression throughout. My mom finally got tired of her messing up the garage and got rid of her. I don't think anyone in the family was upset or even noticed. It's funny that my dad, of all people, was the one who liked dogs, because I can remember further back when I was 7, we were vacationing on the beach in Galveston, Texas. A small terrier was barking and moving around me and my siblings back and forth in a semicircle. To me, it was just a nuisance, but my dad flipped out when he saw it. He pinned the thing down in the sand and was choking the life out of it for a couple minutes. I pleaded with him to let it go. I don't think I was worried about the dog as much as I was about him getting in trouble for killing one. Whatever rage he had slowly seemed to subside, and he got up and the dog staggered away. I never even thought about it until now. As a teenager, there were a couple of times I ran into a German Shepherd while out walking on the dirt roads. In both cases, they snarled at me. One even charged me, but eventually veered off and then slowed down. Those were terrifying experiences because I didn't have so much as a stick to defend myself. Even with those experiences, I didn't have a negative impression of dogs. Most of the dogs I had saw were in the homes of friends of friends, or church members. I never added much to a conversation. But when I did, I'd often make trouble for myself. Not adding to a conversation also causes trouble. People are uneasy with someone who's too quiet. But just sitting there and petting a dog was usually enough for people to look past that. I knew since the age of 11, most people liked dogs more than cats, and some felt very strongly about them. I remember sitting in the house of a church member as she was giving a moment-by-moment synopsis of the night she took her dog to an emergency room for pets. My path toward becoming a dog hater started when I was 20, and I didn't even know it. It was early December. I was enlisted. I spent all spring, summer, and fall in training. And now my first duty was Fort Wainwright, Alaska. My roommate, Aaron, I'm sticking with these first names, was from the same town I had grown up in. It was College Station, Texas. There were so many outskirts that we never crossed paths before winding up in Alaska. He also grew up in a religious family. He even spent the first few years of his life in a religious compound or camp. It was where his parents had met. For a guy who towered over 6 feet, Aaron was one of the least intimidating people in the barracks. He had a gentleman's demeanor, was articulate, well-read, and not interested in shooting or any physical activities beyond dancing. This was during the don't ask, don't tell policy, and we all quickly picked up that he was probably gay. But there were more than a few signs, and he never told, and we never asked. He was a friendly guy, but it seemed like half the company begrudged him for being the way he was. Before the Army, Aaron had a short career driving a cargo truck for some kind of party company. They'd host parties at various places like college campuses, and Aaron would haul their supplies around. He bragged that he slept with lots and lots of women he'd met while traveling. He'd even claimed to have slept with the pink or yellow Power Ranger. Now, for those of you who were born yesterday, it was common for men in my age group to pad their numbers in this department. Lou, one of my friends, joked that Aaron was telling the truth, but you had to translate women to men, and the pink Power Ranger was probably the red or blue one. I remember Aaron telling me about a pit bull he had as a child. He had a story about it not liking someone who wound up stealing from them. A different one about almost coming to blows with a guy who had a problem with his dog. And yet another one about the pet cat that committed suicide by sitting next to their pit bull. The dog had no choice but to bite the poor tiny thing's head off. Surely the cat knew and just wanted to die. The story chilled me even then. My time in the Army was almost entirely pet-free. There were strict rules against having a cat or a dog in the barracks, and you didn't see any wandering around on post. When we deployed to Iraq, I saw dogs mostly at a distance. I remember talking to the interpreter about pets and asked if he had a pet dog because it was the pet of choice for most people. He had a look of disgust on his face. Dogs are dirty. Why would someone want a dog as a pet when they could have a cat instead? Iraq is a hot and dry country, but by November it gets cold, rainy, and all that dust turns into mud. I remember we were pulling overnight security at one of the election sites we had set up earlier. We were now making sure nobody planted bombs there. Our first sergeant went with us on one of those nights, and he found a yellow puppy out in the streets and took it back with us to the compound. I'm sure it was against some kind of rule to do that, but first sergeants are high-ranking, and authorities above him can't be everywhere at once, so for a time he had a puppy tethered to our little HQ. It's a row of metal shipping containers repurposed into buildings. I remember early one morning after coming back to the security detail, and the dog was barking at me as I walked toward the aid station. I was wearing a rain poncho, and I shot my arms up high. My profile almost doubled in appearance, and the dog let out a loud yelp without me even touching it. That made my entire day. Aaron and I didn't see much of each other during deployment. My platoon was rotated to a remote outpost in Rawa for the entire winter. The next spring, I was back in Mosul. It was a different platoon's turn to endure that place. As a pack clerk, Aaron never left the main compound more than a handful of times, and he spent all day with the most high-ranking people in the company. He wasn't well-liked because he didn't have that warrior mindset. The way he saw it was he was a clerk and wasn't going to fool anyone by trying to act like someone else. Sorry, I heard something. One second. Okay, it's my kid. I just had to check on him. Sorry about that. Early in May, a folder with everyone's award paperwork went missing. The command staff accused Aaron of shredding it even though he insisted he didn't. He was demoted and put on extra duty for 2 weeks as a result. I ran into him holding a plastic bag as he walked around the living areas picking up trash and cigarette butts. No doubt the sight of this gave at least half the company a lot of satisfaction. I told him it was messed up, that even though he wasn't all hardcore like them, he was still good at his job. I was headed out to the chow hall and told him to skip the detail and come with me. After all, the command staff wasn't going to watch his every move. He declined. They had given him MREs, and he's have to miss out on real food for the next 2 weeks. I'll never forget the look he had on his face. It wasn't his usual grin. He looked defeated. I didn't want to miss dinner myself, so I made the slow southern goodbye and headed out to the chow hall. Aaron looked at me the entire time as if he wanted to keep walking. I looked back a couple times, and he just stood there looking at me. I gave a quick smile and went to dinner. When I got back, I went to the aid station and used the laptop there to try and enroll for an online college course. Back then, I spent most of my free time obsessing over ways to move up in life. Being lower enlisted gave me a strong incentive in that department. I was navigating through the Central Texas College website when the page stopped loading. I restarted the internet browser and realized we had no internet again. Throughout the deployment, when someone died, the internet for the compound would go down. I think the idea was that the Army would notify family members directly instead of them finding out through a news outlet. I had an uneasy feeling, and I wondered who had died this time. I saw a couple of the command staff out near the living area talking on handheld radios on my way in. I hadn't thought much of it. Before I could leave the aid station, Ben, one of the other medics, walked in and in a solemn voice said, "David, we need to talk." David is my actual last name, he says. Ben didn't even need to tell me what happened. I realized this was serious and most likely about Aaron. My worst fears were confirmed. Aaron had crawled into one of the mortar bunkers and shot himself not long after our conversation. He died instantly. The next day was surreal. I just couldn't believe it. Our last conversation played over and over again in my head. The way he looked at me as I made my way to dinner. It was just one meal. I couldn't give up on the meal and spend time with a friend who needed it. I imagine Aaron died knowing he didn't have any real friends. Everything felt unreal. Aaron wasn't the first person to die from our unit during our rotation in Rawa. We lost 2 men from an IED. We had been driving en route, on a route we called Bridol. It wasn't even a road. It was just a vehicle-worn trail, and we kept getting stuck in the mud. After realizing that we weren't going to make it through all the mud, we decided to turn the convoy around and go back. Someone hid a pressure-activated bomb in the mud, and the time it took for us to track our way back. That bomb blew through the back of the end of the striker in front of me. The 2 men in the gunner hatches weren't even in it when we got out to look for them. Their remains were found several feet away. We spent the rest of the day gathering the remains we could find from the back of the striker. I was shaken up, nowhere near as bad as some of the other guys. They were bawling uncontrollably. It affected the mood of the entire platoon. Those two had always argued like a married couple, but afterwards our tent was near silent. Now, months later, it was me being sent out of shape and crying over Aaron. And them being less phased. I had to get over it fast. Even before his memorial service, the command staff was already upset they'd had to do all this work from now on. We weren't getting another pack clerk. The same soldiers who cried months earlier were making jokes about Aaron's suicide. In their minds, he was never a real soldier and shouldn't have ever been there. I hated it then, but over the years, I developed a deep resentment toward the military. Not the institution, but the people in it. For all the good out there, you had pompous, cruel, petty people who looked down on anyone who wasn't enough like them. Combat Arms was full of people who were ugly toward the world and proud of it. Years later, I'd grow to hate people like them the same way I hate dogs now. I asked the first sergeant if I could have the mailing address for Aaron's family. I told him I wanted to buy them flowers for the funeral. He hesitantly gave it to me on a post note. He told me to be very careful about talking to them, and he was trying to keep me out of trouble. I sent them the nicest bouquet money could buy. In 2006, you could order them online and even add a note. I left them a short note with my email address. Sometime later, I got an email from Richard, Aaron's dad. He didn't even think Aaron had killed himself. The whole family was positive someone else must have done it. I didn't have the heart to try to argue with him on that. I was tight-lipped through the rest of the deployment. I felt I had already disregarded too much of the first sergeant's advice. 2 years after all of this, I learned they had found the missing folder in the desk of one of the NCOs to me. An NCO, a non-commissioned officer. It's just another way of saying a sergeant of some kind, because there are a lot of different ranks with the word sergeant in it. In early December 2006, after a 3-month extension, our plane touched down on an airbase near Fairbanks, Alaska. The nightmare was all over. I remember shaking hands with well-dressed people as we filed away from the tarmac. Years later, my friend told me that we shook hands with Sarah Palin that night. She was the governor back then, and this was before she became famous. This isn't really part of the dog-hating story, but it's my one celebrity encounter, so I'm going to throw it in. We were all given leave for the holidays. That same December, I was in Ennis, Texas, which was where Aaron's family had moved. It's close to Dallas. I met his dad, Richard, his mom, Betty, and his younger siblings, Nick and Mabel. He had an older sister named Michelle, but I didn't see her that trip. We talked about Aaron. One other guy from the Army had visited them earlier, but from this point on, I would be the only person who'd known Aaron and still remained in touch with them. I visited them again next fall. I hung out with Mabel during the last days of the visit. We were close to the same age. At one point, she brought out some weed and started smoking it. I'd smoked before as a civilian with some fast food friends. I knew the risk. That stuff was hard to resist, so I smoked it with her. Aaron had told me about his family before. When talking about Mabel, he used the words raging and bull dyke. and said she hated men and that anyone who tried to come on to her would get their balls cut off. She was a lot friendlier than he'd made her sound. Later that month, she drove up to visit me. I was now stationed in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I remember watching Pirates of the Caribbean with her, and she started rolling a joint. I couldn't believe she'd brought weed on the post with her. She paused the movie, and we walked behind my quarters out of view by a creek and smoked it. I was paranoid someone would smell it, but she seemed confident. She'd been in the Navy herself and did this all the time. That night, as we finished the movie, she told me to get on the floor and sit next to her in the bed, off the floor. And she got close to me. Her hand began holding mine. I felt like we were becoming more than friends here. She kissed me hard, pulled her gym pants down and sweatshirt off in what seemed like an instant, and that was all she'd been wearing. We did not finish the movie. I didn't see it coming at all, and I didn't think she'd like me in that way, because I was a guy. I was scared about continuing to see her, as I figured she'd get me in trouble sooner or later, so I lied and said I had training and she wouldn't be able to visit in the future. I was still in touch with the family, and the next time I visited, I was living in Colorado. I was finished with active duty, taking some college classes, and living with a friend from deployment. Mabel wasn't chasing after me then. I think she had a girlfriend at that point, but we still hung out. I was in the reserves now. I was smoking synthetic weed because the Army Reserves couldn't test for that so easily. We smoked some of it together. She didn't like it very much, but for me it was either that or sobriety. In the spring of 2010, I met Stacy. She lived in Colorado Springs, about 20 minutes from me. She was so beautiful. The first time I saw her, I didn't think I had a chance. I asked her out and she said yes. I remember the smile she gave me when we met at the movie theater. She reached out to hug me like some kind of graceful reflex. As we bonded over the weeks, I realized she was like me, had terrible interpersonal skills and was just getting by in that department. I couldn't believe my luck because she really liked me, not the person I was pretending to be. Stacy was 29 and lived with her family. She'd gone to school to learn sign language. Now she was in a dog training program. She had 2 small dogs. She was meticulous about training them, meticulous about everything. They were trained to use a doorbell she'd installed at the patio door to let them in and out to use the bathroom. I was keeping my synthetic weed habit a secret from Stacy. When she found out, she was mad at me for keeping secrets from her. My habit was worse than I was willing to admit to myself at the time. Synthetic weed was a lot closer to crack than it was to weed. I was barely functional enough to finish my classes. She'd go days without hearing from me. She finally told me that it didn't even feel like a real relationship anymore, and if she didn't hear from me in the next day, she'd assume I'd given up. When I smoked this stuff, I was too dumb to even talk to another person. That day she had given me came and went, and I smoked my way through it. From that point, I knew I was a bad boyfriend, and no matter who I wound up with, I'd just choose getting high and push everyone away. Later that year, I deployed with. They were there to run a detention facility on one of the air bases. I had to quit the fake cold turkey because I would have eventually been caught if I kept pushing my luck. I was a shell of a person on that deployment. I slowly lost any resilience I'd built up, and every step I walked felt like it took a lot of effort. I worked in a small clinic during the employment. It was the easiest job I've ever had, and I hated it. I realized I just hated working in the medical field. I didn't really have the passion for people that it took to be a good caretaker. I decided that once my deployment was finished, I was going to find a new career and start over. So now we're on to the pre-dog hater era. By December 2011, I was back from deployment. In almost no time, I was back on fake weed. I visited Aaron's family the same month. They were always happy to see me. I went with Mabel and her friends to a drive-through movie theater. We smoked weed and watched one of the Harold and Kumar movies back to back with some movie called Immortals. Looked a lot like 300. Mabel's girlfriend had just broken up with her and she needed to get her mind off things. And that night we were in a makeshift room she'd set up in her parents' garage. We were still smoking weed and she came on to me again. This time it didn't scare me. I wasn't afraid of troubles like I used to be. I remember holding her that night and thinking this might work out. She'd always run off with a woman before I had a chance to be a shitty boyfriend and hurt her the way I hurt Stacy. Indeed, she hooked up with Cassie before the visit was over. Maybe I was a good luck charm for her. I like Mabel's confidence. She didn't have an ounce of hesitation, and she seemed to possess an endless drive and didn't care one bit of what anyone else thought of her. In that same small room was Mabel's new dog, a pit bull she named Bubba. I remember it escaping twice. One of the times it approached a group of kids playing next door. They were visibly worried as I tried to chase it down and bring it back in. I remember taking it for a run to get its energy out. I had such little experience with dogs, I didn't think to bring a plastic bag. We were blocks away from the house when it squatted in the middle of the sidewalk and let out a turd big enough to have come from a human. Being who I am today, I'm ashamed to say, I left it there and continued running. After that, I moved in with my parents, who now lived in Vancouver, Washington. I made good on my decision to change careers and was finishing out my reserves obligation with a unit nearby. I was now going to school for mechatronics. It was more hands-on and technical than anything I'd learned as a medic or as a nursing student. I didn't get high before going to school. I went in for the day, read everything, did everything, even stayed around to help one of the other students. I'd get home and smoke fake weed. The dosing with this stuff was so irregular. I'd take what I thought would be a normal hit, and I'd get so high I could hear the sound of my heart pounding. I'd get up, pace, breathe deeply, paranoid I'd finally overdone it, and this was about to kill me. Fortunately, the highs never lasted longer than a half hour, and I'd soon realize I was in the clear. One day in the spring of 2013, after I'd gotten high, I realized I didn't feel any better than before I'd smoked. The only thing was I was really getting out of this was losing half my IQ. I threw the rest I had in the trash. It was a rough few months getting used to sober reality again. I remember getting on my bike and riding down the Highway 205 bridge. It had a bike path in the middle of it, into Portland. I'd volunteer at Free Geek. It's a charity that takes in old computers and refurbishes them. I tried to learn things in their classes, but my mind was so gone it was hard to grasp anything. Still, I was too busy that summer to have time for despair. By fall, I was back for my last year of the program. I was back to my usual routine, spending all day in school, at the study hall, at the lab, doing something now when I was sober, and then I'd come back home. I became a Star Trek fan. It was always a world I wanted to escape to when I was a kid, and now at 30 years old, it became the same thing again, something to look forward to when I got home. Next spring, one of my lab instructors named Larry has me dog sit for him for a while and his wife go on vacation. While he and his wife, excuse me. It was hands down the easiest job I've had. I'd put the food out for the dogs in specific order in specific spots. They were fed twice a day, then I'd let them out on the back patio 20 minutes later. They were Doxies, wiener dogs, and it didn't matter how well they knew me or how much I pet them, they'd bark for 5 minutes each time I walked in the house. What made this job easy was that these were older dogs and Larry had installed baby gates to keep them penned in the living room. So as long as I stayed out of that room, they wouldn't bother me. I never charged Larry because they left the place stocked with food and he left a stash of weed for me. I still smoked the real stuff when I could find it. It wasn't half as bad. I was getting money from my GI Bill anyways. They eventually gave me a Keurig coffee maker for all the dog sitting. I noticed two unsettling things while sitting these dogs. One was that a couple of them were eating each other's poop when I let them out. I never let them lick me after that. The other was the oldest dog. It had gone blind and was losing its hearing. Anytime she bumped into one of the other dogs, they'd go from calm to snarling in an instant. I'd never seen them bite her. That was all juxtaposed with their owners saying what sweet dogs they were. I was talking to Mabel more. I always liked the idea of homesteading, and every crazy idea I'd had about, I'd text her. She was the kind of person who liked crazy ideas. I knew about Earth ships and always wanted to replicate these designs. I'd graduated my tech program and still had funding left, so I started taking engineering prerequisites. My parents moved and sold their home, but I had money and a part-time job working for the program I just graduated from, so I rented a room from a guy in town that my classmate had helped me find. Some weekends I'd visit Larry and Kelly. I'd help Kelly's sister on house projects. I never cared about payment, but I always got paid regardless. One time when I was there to dig a dry well, their poodles were barking at me, and they were so shrill, and that alone was upsetting. I walked right past them. One bit my ankle, and I stopped, turned around, and looked at them. They were backing away now, still barking. I'd have given money just to kick the one that did it. I mean, I was minding my own business, and this thing just bites my ankle. Feeble or not, I don't want to tolerate anything that feels it can do that. A year into my engineering prerequisites, mostly math, Mabel tells me she wants to come down to Texas and make a kid with her girlfriend. I think most guys would have been put off by the idea of trying to have a kid on purpose, and my funding was about to run out on top of how crazy this actually was. But I was in. I always wanted to have a kid, and I wanted Mabel in my life. This was my chance to have both. Maybe not exactly the way I imagined it. In the summer of 2015, I was down in Texas with them. They'd gone from one dog to having 8 big dogs in the same makeshift room she'd set up in her parents' garage. Even sitting down in this room took a feat of agility. I had tiptoe across patches of floor not covered in dogs just to get to my sitting spot. I was with them for a few days, and I knew I couldn't live like that. I always imagined that once I'd finished school and got a good job, I could afford a place with room for everything. I held on to that homesteading dream for a long time. I finished one more quarter of school. My funding was out now. Cassie was pregnant, and I needed to find a job soon. I had my school job, but it wouldn't be enough. After a few rejections, I was hired at a factory in Hillsboro, Oregon. This was another rough change for me. It felt the same way I had in basic training years ago when I was a brand new private. My boss wanted me to learn it all his way, and time he saw me studying the material my way, he'd be furious. I was always focused on diagrams and schematics. A lot of things just made him furious. It was common to hear him yelling on the phone at someone from a different module. He was not a guy who suffered excuses. One night, a coworker said he needed to go because of a vet emergency involving his dog. My boss was suddenly a different person. He told him to do what he needed to do because he completely understood. I found out my boss had a pit bull who he was very fond of. He told me when the day finally came that his dog died, he wouldn't be able to make it in for the rest of the week. It was a grueling learning curve for me. Sure, we had procedures of the work we did, but they didn't tell you exactly what to do or how to do it, so you just had to build up a working memory for these things. Our job was to keep air scrubbing equipment in operation. The equipment upstairs that made the real product couldn't do its job without our equipment running. Our machines were always going down for one reason or another, so there were a few nights we weren't busy that I worked the night shift. I lost track of the time because I was caught up with my new job role. I realized it had now been 11 months and still no baby. I finally asked them what was going on. They told me they went to the doctor and he said Cassie had never been pregnant to begin with. They didn't believe it themselves because Cassie looked like she was pregnant. I think it was a phantom pregnancy. A person experiencing a phantom pregnancy is so convinced they're pregnant, they experience signs of it without actually being pregnant. I learned about it back when I was studying nursing. Things between me and them fizzled out for a while. I was just busy. I found Stacy on Facebook. I loved things badly with her, so I reached out to see how she was doing. She had a new man in her life along with his young daughter. I apologized for what I had put her through. I was glad someone was treating her right. I caught her up on where my life had gone after I left. I told her everything about Mabel and Cassie. Stacy was dumbfounded. This whole story is a lot to drop on someone after all. She told me she was proud of me for getting my life back on track, but to stay away from those two and not to give them any more money. She told me she would have to block me because her boyfriend didn't like us communicating. I understood. I said everything I set out to tell her. It always bothered me the way I faded out of her life and practically ghosted her. She meant a lot more to me than that and deserved a lot better. For the next 2 years, work was just about the only thing in my life. I didn't have time for much else during the week. On weekends, I was awake when everyone else was sleeping. This was my first real job since making that career change, and I was determined to make it work. I didn't mind the abuse my body took or the fact that my boss had a real hair-trigger temper. I was at least saving up money and had plans to eventually go back to school. Every so often, I'd vacation to see Leo. He had moved to Texas. During summer 2018, I took a 2-week vacation to Texas. I had family and friends down there, and I was going to visit them. I wasn't able to rent a car because I didn't have a credit card, Texas and its dumb rules. I had to travel by a combination of friends and Greyhound bus routes. I saw Mabel and Cassie the second week. They had moved from our parents' garage and now lived in a refurbished shed. It was big as far as sheds go. Cassie's aunt had an acre of land and a house that had been damaged beyond repair. She actually gave it to Cassie. Their new house sat on the old one's foundation. Mabel was working at a pallet factory and Cassie stayed home with their 8 or so dogs. Mabel had a new homesteading project in the work, but there was a lot of work to be done, so they had a whole acre to work with now. She had dug a small pond by a tree for her ducks that more looked like a giant puddle. Most of what you could see was just mud. I kept in touch with them after that. Later that fall, they called and told me they'd talked and wanted to try having a kid again. I'd be in a poly relationship with them this time. I liked the idea. As working nights, I just didn't meet people. I wasn't getting any younger. I figured this was just as much a relationship as I could handle. I now had 2 girlfriends living a half a continent away from me. It didn't change my day-to-day life in any significant way. My job felt less technical and more like being a NASCAR pit crew, only we'd spend the first half of the job scrambling to find parts and tools. There was a lot of heavy lifting, cramped spaces, and connections you had to fight for. It was a week of frustration and a weekend of being wore out. Early in 2019, I visited Mabel and Cassie in Clarksville, Texas. That area was chilly and wet in the winter. I spent the day in their room, and I had so many dogs. I had to make a spot in the end of their bed to even sit. Twice or so a day, they'd let the dogs out to use the bathroom. They'd both open the doors between them, and outside the dogs would stampede into the yard. There were dog turds everywhere, on the edge of the foundation where the previous house had been, out in the patchwork of mud, puddles of grass surrounding it. After several minutes, they'd open the door again, and the dogs would start trickling back in. There was a thin layer of mud and grime throughout the house. I've always had a weak sense of smell, but walking into that house was like stepping into a different atmosphere. I could definitely smell the dogs, but I could also feel a warm, stale wave of humidity hit me when I walked in. The problems with it went beyond the dogs. They just had too much stuff and their utilities were very shoddy. Anyone wondering how someone could live like this, keep in mind they have always had weed every time I visited them. We just get high enough to not be bothered by it. For the most part, the dogs just lied down in their spots. They didn't have much room to move either. Getting to the kitchen was a task unto itself. I had to get past a cage holding a litter of inbred kittens, and it was almost as wide as the hallway. Across from the fridge was a cage made of wood Miriam had nailed into a frame and wrapped with chicken wire. The German Shepherd was the most psychotic I'd ever seen. The moment he saw you, he'd erupt into rage-filled barks and snarls loud enough to cause echoes. I held my palm out in front of me. I've been told that this was a way to put a dog at ease around you, but this dog tried to bite through the cage and get at me whenever I made any attempt to interact with it. I didn't hate dogs up until this point. I didn't even hate them after this visit, but we're getting close to that part. I think it's worth mentioning because if I hadn't experienced this whole dog situation with them, I don't think I'd be a dog hater now. In fall of 2019, they both got arrested for trying to protect Cassie's sister from an assault. The officer just arrested everyone instead of figuring out what was going on. It sounded kind of crazy, but it was a poor, small town, and they probably didn't have many cops to handle something like this. They really lived in a rough area. I started looking at houses listing in my area. They were expensive, but I made enough to be able to afford a mortgage, and I made some money. I had some money saved up anyways. Told Mabel and Cassie I'd buy a place up there and they could live with me. I pitched it as an idea anyways. We'd always talked about homesteading together, but for all the talk, I was up here renting a room, either working or sleeping, and they were both living in bad conditions. Up here, the conditions were nicer, and we could actually live together. Mabel was unemployed at this time. She'd have no problem finding a job up where I lived, though. They liked the idea. I don't know who I was messaging at the time because Cassie always used Mabel's Facebook account. I think they just shared a phone. I remember asking how many dogs they planned on bringing with them. All of them, was the reply. I asked if they'd bring that crazy German Shepherd dog they had. She said especially that one because nobody else would understand and that this was his forever home. I reminded them that the dog would kill me the moment it didn't have a cage in its way and they wouldn't budge. I changed my mind about them moving up after that. It bothered me that I was willing to change my life in a big way and they refused to surrender even one dog in consideration of my personal safety. Forget the part where I'd try to keep the place clean with all the other dogs living in it. They knew this dog was dangerous enough to have to cage it around all other people. My life would have been in more danger at home than in a factory dealing with corrosive, reactive, and toxic chemicals. I now felt my first true hatred for dogs. I remember Googling to see if others felt the same. I read a few articles written by people who didn't like them. My favorite part is always the comment section. The article tells you one person thinks or feels, but the comments give several times the perspective. Spouses, parents, and children alike were commenting about having to live with the dogs they hated and being forced to care for them. My favorite comment was from a mother who called them garmless pieces of shit and fantasized about dropping the dogs off in a forest and driving away. What made me hate dogs wasn't just the last visit I'd had. It was all the jump scares from barking, being stared down anytime I ate, and those wild moments where they'd jump all over the place and destroy everything in their path. I'd visited enough houses with dogs to experience things like that more than a few times. I couldn't even think of one thing I enjoyed about them, yet so many people in my life felt so strongly about them that they didn't even seem bothered by all the trouble these dogs caused. I wanted to have a good life with Mabel and Cassie, a clean and comfortable home we could live with, full of things to look forward to. But even if I had helped them clean and organize, those dogs would have ruined everything out of sheer mindlessness. After a week, I stopped Googling for dog haters. It felt good to read from people with similar feelings, but life goes on, and I just wasn't going down a path that would alienate half the people I knew. 2020 came, and by spring, my commute was getting nicer and nicer. Most of the slowpokes were on COVID lockdown. I went from being antisocial to a social distancing champion. The lockdown didn't really apply to people in my kind of job role. I don't know if I was an essential worker, but the factory would have stopped running if all of us technicians went on lockdown too. I didn't mind having to wear a mask. I was in and out of respirators at work anyways. Only now, lines at the grocery store were a lot shorter. In the summer, I decided to end it with Mabel and Cassie. All the reasons were building up. The situation with the dogs was a big one. I was also only interested in Mabel to begin with. She was the reason I'd put up with Cassie and her dogs. I spent little time with Mabel, little quality time anyway. I finally decided this wasn't worthwhile for me, and I'd rather be single again, which wouldn't change my daily living by much anyway. I was going to get around telling them. We could go days or even weeks between communicating, and I was going to take the time to figure out how I wanted to tell them. I wasn't in any hurry. I turned my phone back on at the end of a weekend. My workplace issues me a cell phone, so I can use it as a personal phone too, and have one less phone bill to worry about. One less bill. But it's meant for work, and I have to have it on me during the entire shift. After it loaded up, I saw a bunch of missed calls and unread texts. Mabel had tried calling, I had called her back and found out that a lot had changed. Cassie had broken up with her. Mabel was taking it really hard. Mabel's older sister Michelle had moved a couple towns over earlier that summer, and she was now living there with most of her family in a huge house. Michelle is a CPA. I think the only reason the family was financially stable is because of her, along with death benefits from Aaron. Richard, their dad, always joked about them while growing up, saying they were so poor they couldn't afford the R. They were just poo. Wow. Mabel is the youngest in her family. She had one brother left, and he lived in a small cabin the next town over, and he developed some serious mental health issues, schizophrenia, during the time I knew him, and never seemed to leave his room. They decided it was best for everyone to have him out there when they made their big move. As I mentioned, Mabel was living with her family now, and they practically lived in a mansion thanks to her sister's income and property values in this area. I never told Mabel about my plans to break up with them. After all, the turn of events changed everything. I finally had her to myself. If Cassie and her dogs were out of the picture, there was no reason to break up. I knew this summer was probably my one chance to spend time with her, so I scheduled a vacation as soon as possible. By August, I was pulling up in the driveway in my Mustang rental car. Seriously, not what I was out to rent, but it was all they had for some reason. Mabel loved the car. She wasted no time driving it herself. I've always been slow to learn the ins and outs of things like new cars, but Mabel had it all figured out. It actually self-drove to some extent. My timing couldn't have been better either. Michelle wanted everyone out of the house for a week so she could have time with her boyfriend. Richard was going to California to see his ailing siblings, and Betty was going to Florida to see her family. I was going on a road trip with Mabel. We had a short detour to get two of her dogs from Cassie. Since she had so many, it was decided Mabel needed to take two of them. Luckily for me, they were small dogs. We were in a convertible after all. We slowly made our way from East Texas to Florida. Mabel wanted to visit as many Civil War historic sites as she could along the way. The entire trip was as miserable for me as it was fun for her. I hated being stuck in a small car. One of the dogs kept trying to climb into the driver's side, so I had to hold it. Every time we stopped for gas, I wanted to lock the car, but the dogs would set off the alarm by moving around. In hotel rooms, I'd step out of the shower and get greeted by a chorus of barking. They didn't like to see me, like they hadn't just seen me walked in there 20 minutes ago. At one of the gas stations, Mabel saw a straw cowboy hat for $20 and wanted me to get it. No problem for me. I didn't know what she really saw in it, but it was an exciting find for her. And she wore it for the rest of the trip, and even a year later was still wearing it. Those are the moments I'd live for. Sometimes question whether I could even feel joy. Just a $20 hat was all it took to make Mabel's day. We arrived in Florida to see Mabel's extended family and ran into Betty. Mabel has more family in Florida than I can keep track of. One uncle in a regular neighborhood, a half-sister living in a trailer park, an aunt living in a resort community, a niece in an apartment. I met them all while I was half tired and miserable. Being off my schedule, I was still polite. I wasn't really any fun. This trip around was about Mabel anyway. We visited the Florida beach a couple times. This one had a no dogs policy, but Mabel's dogs were service animals. She showed me a website where they had been registered as such. By now I was catching on and bringing plastic bags with me when we took them out. Mabel forgot to do this half the time, but those dogs never forgot to poop. We were out in the water with the dogs at the shore when a lady in a golf cart drove up and told us to leave, and that the sign said no dogs allowed as she drove off. I was secretly relieved. I didn't enjoy playing in the beach the way I used to when I was a kid. Mabel was incensed, and we got back into the hotel room. She was on the phone with the park and read them the riot act about how the service dogs, and she was a disabled veteran. She was on VA disability at this point. She used every combination of words she could think to get the woman from the golf cart fired. We were given permission to return to the beach with our service dogs, and the entire time Mabel was eager for this person to show up again so she could rub it in her face that she'd won this fight. I was also secretly relieved we didn't see her this time. 1 second. Just want to go check in and see all who's here. Oh, hey, Serena. Ew. What's up, Kling? What's up, Asher? What's up, Lucy Loose? Frederick Douglas. What's up? And just catching up with y'all for a minute. Yeah, I'm back. I'm sharing a story from one of our group members. So, and I'll keep going. But yeah, I wanted to go and see what everybody's up to. And Gling's here to moderate, so we're good. So everybody just enjoy yourselves. I'm gonna read. This is a super long story. So what I'm gonna do is kind of leave a cliffhanger, and I'm gonna read a good majority of it and then finish the rest tomorrow. So then you'll have to come back to hear the end of it. But I'm so happy that I have people that are so willing to share. Yep, Asher's there too. My bad. So, it's dogskillchildren@gmail.com. And I put it in the description of the videos as well. So let's get back to this. When the trip was all over, the rental car had been smoked in, had sand, mud, and dander in it. Maybe spent a total of 20 minutes cleaning it the day before I had to return it. Mabel, excuse me. I wanted to take my time with the cleaning. I've been through enough inspections to know they always find things, especially if you do a rushed cleaning job. Miriam told me to stop. I don't know why it bothered her that I was cleaning my rental car, but I listened and obeyed, and at the end it cost me hundreds. Luckily, I was always saving and could afford it. By September, I had another vacation. I was using the rest of my vacation time. This time, Mabel was coming up to visit me. Tim, the person I was renting with, didn't mind me having a guest for a while. This was the real vacation for me. Mabel and I got to tour the enchanting Pacific Northwest during its best season. We had hiking trails, lakes, beaches, and rivers, mostly to ourselves. Even without the pandemic, most vacationers would be gone by now. No more insane road trips or dogs. Even I didn't get to experience the area much because of my schedule, but now I had someone to share it with. This was perfect. Mabel enjoyed the trip too. Only difference here was that I also had a good time. This was the vacation I'd like to remember. We visited a beach town on one overcast day. One of the tourist shops was selling kites for $35. Mabel wanted the kite that was shaped like a tortoise, just like the hat from the gas station. It made her day to fly that kite on the beach. After the vacation, I was back to my regular life. Around the end of October, I got a call from Mabel. She was mad at me. She said I'd gotten her pregnant. She had thrown up every morning that week. A take-home test said she was pregnant. A doctor later confirmed it. She decided to keep it. I was thrilled. This was life-changing. I'd just about given up on ever having kids at this point. In my mind, Mabel was the perfect person to have a kid with. She had lots of confidence where I was always hesitant. She had an uncanny way of noticing every detail around her. While I'd easily get overwhelmed by everything around me and then wind up with tunnel vision, she seemed to pick up on things fast, while my learning curve was always slow and laborious. Mabel's family was always close by, and they did a good job of taking care of each other. She always had a good place to go when things didn't work out, and they always had a free day laborer when the need for one came up. Mabel talked about getting her own place again. Her sister offered to help her get a place under the condition that she didn't get back with Cassie. Her family did not like Cassie. I started to consider the conditions Mabel had always lived in. Always filthy and full of dogs. Her sister had dogs herself, but she never let them ruin a house the way Mabel and Cassie did. I warned Mabel that if she got a bunch of dogs again, they'd destroy the new house just like they'd done with the last one. Up until now, I'd always gotten along with Mabel. I always went along with everything she wanted. I was easy to get along with. Most people I know find me very easy to get along with. But after airing those concerns, it was as if I had declared war on Mabel. She was furious. There was a fuck you, and I'll get as many dogs as I want, and a bunch of other things. I didn't respond for at least a week. I was busy with work anyway. Always busy with work. I was finding out what the new guys were making. All of us old-timers training them made way less. Every year that boss of mine showed me the raise. Never big, but he acted like it was a big raise, and he got scary if you ever disagreed with him. I had just about enough. I couldn't leave my job anymore and have a kid to support. If my boss wanted to give weak raises again, I'd have to move to a different module. I often spent my weekends going over technical documents we had for our equipment. It was poorly organized. The diagrams were hard to read because the print was so small. I had spent time making them easier to read, color coding the lines, adding legends to explain the symbols and colors, and made life easier for someone trying to learn this equipment. I want to be the kind of technician worth keeping around because it's honestly the best you can play with. Now it's time for a different move. I needed to put pressure on my boss. I'm not a confrontational person, but I'm not exactly timid. Usually I react to yelling by just doing what someone wants. It's usually the easiest way forward, but sometimes when I'm certain they're in the wrong, I'll just let them yell and yell whatever shock I felt from the yelling just washes over me, and I'll stand by what I say. I had been screamed at by enough NCOs in the army to not be phased by it. I got a bigger raise that year. It didn't catch me up to new higher pay, but it got me closer. Oh Lord. I patched things up with Mabel a little while later. She told me she felt like she was going through pregnancy alone. I felt bad about it. I didn't want her to feel that way. She had 2 dogs herself, and they were a far cry from a house full of them. I should feel lucky and not make assumptions. Mabel soon had a new girlfriend. She met Sam through a dating website. It was an unspoken arrangement. Mabel wasn't tied down to me because she preferred women. It was only a matter of time before she'd find another one and finally reach that point. Cassie was the only girlfriend I'd met. I was hoping she wasn't like her. I didn't hate Cassie, but she was at least half the reason their house was such a nightmare. I still count my luck that we never succeeded in having a kid together. It has to be said that Cassie deals with major abandonment issues caused by her father, and that maybe the dogs are the only way of coping she could find. Sam seemed a lot more stable than Cassie. She had a job and was raising a teenage daughter. She took care of Mabel instead of being the one Mabel took care of. For me, the pregnancy was easy. I was half a continent away and never pregnant. But for Mabel, it moved from nausea to okay, then having someone kick you from the inside. She swore she was doing acrobats in there. She could even feel little nails clawing at her. My mom had been pregnant a lot when I was growing up, but I just never understood how uncomfortable it could be until now. In late April, I visited my sisters in Sacramento for the weekend. I don't keep up much with my family because there are so many siblings, it's overwhelming. But every so often I visit. I have 4 sisters living in and around Sacramento. That's half of my living siblings. It's a very efficient visit for me. I was FaceTiming Mabel so my sisters could meet her. They were very excited about me having a kid too. Halfway through the chat, she looks at her phone and says, Nick, her brother just died, and ended the call to get a hold of her parents and find out more. Turned out Nick had a heart attack and died a week or so before that. His dad found him long dead when he dropped in to check up on him. It was sad, but not the shock it had been with Aaron. Nick had been mentally ill for a long time, and nobody was waiting for him to get any better. They were just expecting him to die at 40. In the aftermath, though, Mabel now had the cabin he'd been living in, and by that summer, her, Sam, and Kylie, Sam's daughter, had moved in. On July 2nd, 2021, they had a newcomer when Dave was born. Now, even though my boss was always a hard ass, the corporation I worked for really wasn't. They offer lots of vacation time compared to other places, along with maternity leave and even paternity leave, which had just been increased to 12 weeks. COVID and her blessings. Before August had arrived, I was just in Mount Vernon, Texas, visiting my son in a cabin with no more than 600 square feet of space, and that's counting the upstairs loft. First thing I heard when leaving my car were 2 bigger dogs barking at me. Not as scary as Cassie's psycho dog, just typical barking. Sam's daughter got these dogs, but since their new place was small and already had a newborn, they were kept at the side of the house with a fence surrounding them. Sam was a lot different than Cassie. She was sweet and always busy. She was Coda's favorite from early on. And with all the experience I'd had caring for babies while growing up, Sam knew how to hold him, how to talk to him. She had a gift. Mabel was less than energetic. She spent most of the time on her phone, drinking anything she could get a hold of now that she could drink again. I experienced what is known as nesting. It's where a parent feels the need to fix a house up to accommodate a newborn. According to Google, it happens to a lot of guys. This place had its problems too. There just wasn't much space to work with, and 3 different people had all their stuff with them. When I wasn't holding Dave, I'd put things away in bins to free up room, use wire clips to deal with tangled wires near the power strips. I got mats outside to catch the dirt, rugs inside to catch more dirt, and a rug at the bed to catch even more dirt. bug zappers to deal with all the flies we had, covered stainless steel cups to stay a step ahead of those flies. I even washed Mabel's dogs and clipped a pair of nails that hadn't been groomed in years. It was painful for the dog to walk because the nails, and it took a lot of coaxing to get them cut. Dave himself went from sleeping half the time to sleeping less and less. He fought his sleep as if he didn't want to miss anything. What made him sleep even more difficult was the dogs. All it took was one car to drive past our house, and the two outside would start barking. And then the two indoor dogs would bark. And for minutes, all you could hear was the sound of their shrill barking. Every week or so, the two side dogs would escape and run around the house and down the road. I'd usually be the one chasing them. I'd catch the pit bull mastiff first. I usually couldn't find the German shepherd until he came back. One time I was chasing them and I saw a dog in the distance. I got closer. It noticed me as I walked up and realized I wasn't one of their dogs. It was a pit bull just out on its own. I could see another one nearby. I didn't want to continue running now. It was time to just act normal, and I didn't feel like I could walk away at this point without arousing its curiosity. I approached the dog and pet it, just like I imagined anyone else would. After a moment, it seemed to be distracted by something and moved away. I walked back to the house without even looking for the dogs. They weren't mine anyways. Why was I the one doing this? The fence that held these dogs was like a boat that kept springing new leaks. The gate had enough of a gap for them to escape, so now it was held taut with shoestring. They got out from under the chain link, so now there was a pile of logs blocking that part. Feeding them was a real chore. You had to scale the fence because they'd escape if you opened the gate, retrieve the food bowls with the two dogs jumping all over you, fill them. From the other side of the fence, they had a large metal water bowl, more like a trough, that we would fill from the other side with a hose. Sometimes they flipped it over, and you had to go in there and set that right. I eventually got them leashes and collars so I could take them running with me. The German Shepherd dog wouldn't run. As much as the pit bull liked escaping, she was terrified to go running with me and wouldn't budge. Inside the house, we kept noticing wet spots on the rugs. Mabel's dog was peeing all over the house after we fell asleep. It didn't matter if you cut off the water bowl in the afternoon or how many times you let it to go out to pee. He'd wait for everyone to fall asleep and pee in the house. I got an off-road stroller from Dave. I had no idea that Jeep made strollers. Dave was similar to my siblings in that he didn't like being put down for too long. Now, holding a baby is fun, but after a few hours, most people's arms get tired. Since we lived in a dirt road, we needed more than just a regular stroller. When it was just me and Dave, I never went more than 100 feet from the house because I was worried about running into those dogs again. Every so often, Mabel and Sam would join and we'd walk further. Dave often fell asleep in the stroller. Okay, Cosmo. What did Cosmos do? Yeah, so that's my one email, Asher, and then the one that I'm having people send stories to is dogskillchildren@gmail.com. So either email will work. That's cool. I know, why chase them? So this story is incredible, and like I said, the person who sent it is an incredibly interesting person. Things like this give you such a perspective on a person that you've only like met through YouTube and shit, and I find it super intriguing. I really do. I can't help it. What a story already. So I'm gonna finish the rest of the story probably tomorrow. I'm gonna almost guarantee tomorrow. And what I'll do is I'll edit the two videos and I'll let you know that I'm finishing the story so you guys can catch the end of it, because I have skimmed through it and I can tell you it's an incredibly interesting story. Super appreciative to have it sent to me. Let's see. I've got to go finish some shit at the house. I got to cut this out. I was planning on making it a little bit shorter, but that didn't work out. So from the bottom of my dog hating heart, I love the shit out of you guys. Thank you so much for showing up on a Saturday, and I know everybody's busy and has other shit to do. Yes, the email, you can either send it to the ashleylyn420@icloud.com. Ling, I'm glad you made it. Or you can send it to the dogskillchildren@gmail.com. I'll edit it tonight and put all that in there for you. I appreciate you all very much. Yeah, I'll look forward to sharing the rest of the story. So I'll keep you guys updated and let you know when I'm coming back. So love y'all. Love you, Serena. Thanks for being here. Thank you to the mods and everybody else. And we'll look forward to the end of the story tomorrow. Take care, y'all.